Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 168 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast. Proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAP Network, if you will. And I will do something of a dapping. I don't know. Twist with this one tonight. We're here with me, of course, Andrew Hall at Andrew Hall FF. We've got Rocky with me in the sidecar tonight. Rocky, how are you, sir?
Hi, I'm actually here this week.
Hey, I missed you, Rocky. It's been a minute.
Yeah, but nice to be back as always. Andrew's our workhorse here. It seems like every single episode, even if he has to do it by himself. But I'm happy to be here with you tonight, Andrew.
Yeah, I started wondering, like, do you guys just not like me? Like, I'm just always on my own, and then you two are doing your own. It's just like, what is this the same? But no, it's just it lines up weird like that with the holidays and life, and I mean everything else. Just that's why I like having multiple co-hosts. It makes it real easy. Yeah. And with us tonight, we've got one of my favorites in the industry, one of my newest friends, I guess I'll call you that, is Dustin Ludke. How are you tonight, Dustin?
I'm good. I'm excited to be on. Excited to talk some football. We got the Chargers Raiders game on. You know, I got the side screen going with it. The game. 42-0 is crazy right now. I don't
This
understand.
Is nuts. Yeah.
It is nuts.
I don't know if I should be happy or upset. Like, that's where I'm like, I don't have any of these players in any of my fantasy leagues that matter. I'm not playing against any of these players in any fantasy leagues that matter. I was telling Dustin before we started, like, I expected a bad game, but not this kind of bad game. And I'm using bad very loosely because any football is better than no football. But it's more like I expected a 10-7 kind of battle and, kind of like a defensive punt kind of game. This one has been very different, and it already hit the over. So if you bet that, good job. If you had Trey Tucker on your Dynasty taxi squad, you should have moved him and started him, which nobody would have recommended. He's got 2 touchdowns already. So it's a wild game. But again, that's what we love doing. We love recording this during the Thursday night game. It makes it more fun for us to watch and have something to do. But of course, if you're listening to this on podcast, you already know what happened and we won't spoil it. And well, you probably have a better chance of spoiling it anyway. But with that, we're going to go ahead, Dustin.
If you're watching this on Friday, remember this. Because we've complained all week about this. Oh, it's going to be Stick versus O'Connell. It's going to be a junky game. We complained about Zappy and whoever the other week, like Zappy and Trubisky. These are good games. Like, is this fun? Yes. It's 42 points. You can't complain about 42 points.
That's so true.
This is why I play it. But everybody thought Vikings Raiders would have been a decent game, and that was 3-0. Like, we just don't know what games are going to be. That's why we play them. That's why we watch them. That's why the NFL is doing these over the seas game, which overseas games are great. Because it allows more viewing times, more football that we can actually watch. It takes basically an out-of-market 1 o'clock game, puts it on at a different time for us to watch. We watch them. You should watch them. You never know. That's what makes football fun. So remember this next time when we're like, oh, this game's going to be horrible. Remember 42-0 at halftime.
Well, the other piece, I'll use that, and I agree with you 100%. But the other piece I'll say on this is one of those games that when we started the season, right, when you're looking ahead, you're like, this is going to be Justin Herbert versus Jimmy Garoppolo. Yep. And, like, we know what's going to happen. And now we're 15 weeks in, and chaos is here, right? It doesn't take 15 weeks for chaos to show up either. Let's be clear. Like, there are so many matchups these last few weeks that are, I think I had a tweet that was like, I'll see your Browning versus Minshew and raise you a Browning versus Dobbs or or Mullins. You know what I mean? Mullins. Like we're to these weird name matchups. Like this one is a prime
example.
Stick
versus O'Connell. Yeah.
Stick versus O'Connell. If you'd have told me in August we'd be watching Aiden O'Connell light up the Easton Stick led Chargers, I'd be like, well, you're drunk. That makes no sense. But that's how the game is. That's how it goes. There's injuries all the time. This year feels, of course, like more than ever, but I always say that. So part of me is just like, I'm just happy we have some football. I'm just happy we have something to watch that's not, I guess, not like a rerun. Not like reality TV that rots my brain. I'd rather watch this that at least engages me. That's where my head goes. So I'm entirely with you, Dustin.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna get Browning versus Trubisky again next week. We're gonna get Josh Allen versus Easton Stick. We're gonna get Minshew versus Ritter. Like. That's just the way it goes. We're going to get whoever's starting for the Jets versus Sam Howell, who's been not so great, but now might be good. Who knows? Like, it's just, but that's what's fun. And that's what we love about fantasy, because you can pick up a Jake Browning off waiver and he could be a league winner for you.
Yep. And this, I think, shows more than ever in super flex leagues. Go grab those backup QBs. Like, honestly, like the value just goes through the roof for some of these guys. I know there's a lot of logic in packing and stacking your bench, I guess, with backup running backs. But I mean, running backs and QBs are way more important. I mean, no offense to Trey Tucker, but like it's again like that rarely happens with receivers. It's much more frequent with running back and quarterback.
In your Superflex league, every Sunday morning, when you have guys that go out, slide them into your IR, and you should exclusively pick up backup quarterbacks. That's it.
Bingo. Yep.
Right? If you
At this
slide him in,
point,
right?
yeah.
If you slid a guy into IR, picked up Jake Browning, Joe Burrow gets hurt, all of a sudden you have a starter. Worst case scenario, the quarterback doesn't get hurt. You drop him, slide the guy out of IR if he needs to, or you pick up someone else. That's what you should do every Sunday morning.
I completely agree. And I think too, I mean, Rocky, you're in a bunch of leagues, right? How many of your leagues are you starting Jake Browning? Are you starting Easton Stick? You know what I mean? Like I'm sure it's more than one. You know what I mean?
I don't know that it's more than one, but
Well, maybe
know,
not now in the playoffs, because if you're making it to the playoffs, you're not.
Yeah. I can tell you, I talked about this on Trade Addicts earlier this week. I have a team where I have the 3 quarterbacks. I had Herbert, Cousins, and Kenny Pickett.
Oof.
And I'm the 3 seed. So I am starting, unfortunately, Easton Stick tonight, and also Nick Mullins.
So there you go.
Got them both off waivers this week.
That's chaos if I've ever heard it.
Yeah.
There was actually in the league that I'm in, it's a contract league. Oh, there's a Devontae Adams touchdown. There you go, Dustin.
Oh, nice.
So another one though, of course, now we're up to 49. They're going for that Dolphins record.
I know.
But in a league that I'm in, it's a contract league, and it is I'm dominating the league. I'm 21-1, I think, or something like that, 24-1 or whatever it is. Like I've only lost 1 against the median. Like I've just been rocking. I've got Josh Allen and Dak Prescott as my QBs. I just made a trade where I sent a 24 third, which is eventually going to be auction dollars in a Debbie depleted draft. So very little, 24 third for Tyler Lockett, Joe Flacco, Bailey Zappi, and Drew Lock. And it was sent to me for a second, and I said no thanks. And then he sent it again for the third. And I was like, you know what? How can I not do that? Now I don't need any of those players, but now I'm blocking them from starting against me. So in my head, it was a defensive trade. I'm like, I'll send my third just to make sure nobody else starts Joe Flacco against me and their quarterback need. Like all 3 of those guys could be potentially starters the rest of the season. They're not going to have any value next year, but that's okay. I don't care about next year. I'm just trying to win now. And that was a blocking anyone else kind of move.
But Bailey Zappi might start half a season next year.
And honestly, Flacco looked okay. Like he's looked all right and manageable. There are definitely some teams that could use Flacco over, a Minshew or something, to heaven forbid. Like, or if Baker Mayfield goes somewhere else and they're looking at Kyle Trask, that might be like, Joe Flacco, come on down. Like, you never know. Honestly, you never know.
The supply of quarterbacks outweighs the demand next year, but I think that just increases the higher end quarterbacks' likelihood of getting better jobs.
That's a very good point. Yep, I completely agree. So I think quarterbacks are a fun spot, and I think this week is going to be bonkers. We're out of the buys. We're finally done with all that. And then our topic for this week, of course, is the Dynasty playoffs. We talked last week with Mike Stoyanov about redraft and kind of pivoting into Dynasty and talking about some of that partially because Mike was more of a redraft fan anyway, but the season becomes redraft for most of the year. And I feel like once it kind of gets into the playoffs, you're either in or you're out. And if you're out, you should not have a trade deadline. I know, obviously, we've talked about this ad nauseum, and I know you talk about it with Russ every week, Rocky, about not having a trade deadline. And I think that's where I love dynasty leagues that don't, because it allows you to make trades like the one I just made, where it's like, I'm sending a late future pick that I don't really care about to block some people in the playoffs. That's awesome. Like that should be a possibility in every league. So I guess some of the topics I put on the sheet, we can kind of wander through them, but Rocky, I wanted to start with you again. I know I've got a couple of different leagues that I'm in that I care about more than others, right? Heaven forbid. But is there anything you do differently in playoffs and dynasty versus redraft, or do you just kind of go like same mindset all the way around if you're in the playoffs?
What do you mean in terms of?
Well, like, do you do anything different in terms of trading, or in terms of lineups, or in terms of waivers? Like, do you do anything different in general, like in playoffs when you're in the playoffs, as opposed to not making the playoffs and rebuilding?
Well, obviously, the big difference is 99% of redraft leagues you cannot trade in the playoffs. So that's what you just said. Yeah, I definitely I probably try to be a little more active in the playoffs, and it's funny because I used to be when I first kind of got into Dynasty Twitter probably 5-6 years ago. I was a very staunch deadline guy, and I soon came to my senses and yeah, now I am definitely trading where I can. I definitely have some teams I'm trying to make a push with, and it's funny, and it's funny too with like, especially speaking about the difference between redraft and dynasty, because I have a home league that's made up of a bunch of guys that we've been doing it for like 4 or 5 years now, but a bunch of guys that came from a redraft league, most of them that a lot of us were in. And one guy didn't realize the deadline is just before the playoffs, and he got pissed I made a trade today. So he's like, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't be able to make a trade.
Well, the playoffs haven't started. What do you mean? Like, this is the start of the playoffs.
No, but because
today, right?
he's used to redraft where the deadline was like a month ago. So, so trading is the biggest thing that came to mind when you asked the question. I don't know that I handle much else differently as a manager. I mean, I guess the only other thing I can even think of is maybe going, obviously, if you still have a decent amount of fab. I mean, if anybody decent comes available, I'm just throwing all in there. Like at that point, like I know in one redraft, the only redraft league I'm in, I did not do much on waivers. I'm in the playoffs and I have like $80 out of 100. So if some running back that isn't on a team right now, like I'm putting like 80, 75 or 80 on that guy if he becomes available. So that would be the only other thing I can think of.
No, that's a good point. And I think too, if you're in the playoffs, it's like it's still redraft. You know, like if you're in the playoffs, you're still going, you're still grinding, you're still paying attention. I think the biggest difference, and one of the biggest reasons I even got into Dynasty, was that I hated that I wasn't allowed to play anymore. Yeah, like that was by far my least favorite thing. When redraft, I'm just like, oh, I'm out. Like there were sometimes I'd be, you know, back when I wasn't very good and didn't care as much, I'd be out in like week 8 and just be like, oh, well, that sucks. Like I just lost that $100. You know what I mean? Like, geez, like. So yeah, it's interesting to me because it is still very redraft-ish, but the Dynasty twist is kind of fun. So Dustin, I guess, do you have anything you wanted to add to that? Is there anything you do differently in Dynasty in the playoffs that you don't do in redraft other than trading, or even more on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when Dynasty playoffs start, I'm in a off-season mode already. So what I do is I go min-max. I'll go glass cannon. If you're not starting for me, I'm trading you, right? Like that's my mentality, right? I don't need old guys on my bench for the sake of depth, because if someone gets hurt one week, I'm probably out of the playoffs anyway. Now, I generally won't trade to potential other playoff teams. Like I'm not going to trade to the 1 seed that I might face next round. But if I can trade to playoff teams, like if you want this veteran because you might want him for next year, I might even trade to the 1st seed if it's a good enough pick. But I'm just going, these are my starters. This is my lineup because I have no buys. I'm sticking with these guys. My bench is free game, and I want to start stacking young players and picks as much as I can. And so I'm looking at who's the free agent, who can I get off my team, or who might have some hype later on. And I'm just trying to sell them. Like I'm hitting the market hard come playoffs. To me, that's off season basically. Like that is as soon as the bye weeks are over, I don't need depth anymore. I just need to start my studs and roll with it, because if you had, let's say, Justin Herbert last week in the playoffs, he got hurt, you're out of the playoffs. What do you need to pick up Easton Stick? Like, you don't need a backup quarterback at that point. You're out anyway. Trade them all away. Trade them all. Get some picks. Get some young assets. Go from there. That's how I look at the playoffs. I'm all about the trading because I want to start looking for next year already.
That's a good point with trading specifically. Not even just like moving bench guys for depth, but tiering up, consolidating more if you can. Like if you can combine, if you have 12 or like 13 starters in a 10 league, trade 2 or 3 of them and see if you can get a stud or something like that. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be an old guy. Maybe if you have 2 young guys and a decent, pick or prospect or something, throw them all together, get a better young guy, and hopefully, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown or something like that. If you have some other pieces that could get you that.
And I start looking at injury reports, like who's out.
Oh
yeah. Like who can I scoop up and stash in my IR? If you come out of the season, your IR is not full in a dynasty league, you're doing it wrong. Right?
Or you're in a ridiculous league with a bunch of degens that everybody's doing it before you. But this is only 2 options.
But even if you pick up a guy that's a scrub, it's a free roster spots.
Yeah.
I have a league where we still have 8 IR spots because we left them since COVID. I'll throw anybody. If I can pick them up, throw them in IR, like scoop them up, throw them in IR, pick up another, throw them in IR. Like I'll just stack that because it allows me to have, instead of 30 guys on a roster, it allows me to have 38. And I'll take the potential of who knows what happens in the offseason, because I don't have to adjust my roster until the Saturday before the season starts. I can pick up rookies and have 40 guys in my draft. Like I'll have that big notification on Sleeper that says you have 7 guys too many on your roster. Don't care. Don't need to do it until I get to Saturday. Then I'll cut the dead weight. I'll let it roll out as long as I can, because you never know what changes in draft, free agency, preseason, injuries. I want to have more lotto tickets than not.
Amen to that. Yeah, and all of this is kind of getting to my main point and what I usually do anyway too is if I'm in the playoffs, and generally speaking, if I'm contending, I'm trying to consolidate, and if I'm rebuilding, I'm trying to break things apart. Or like I need more upside if I'm rebuilding. I'm willing to split a guy up into 3 guys with upward trajectory that maybe not even be technically a fair trade, or like I don't mind losing a little value if the trajectory is going a different direction. You know what I mean? Like I'll trade one guy on the downturn who's worth way more than 3 guys on the up, because in a year, that's all I care about is the value in a year. And we're all trying to speculate and make profit on trades or whatever, but everybody's got a different mindset of when that profit is needed. And if you're contending, you need it now. Like you put it perfectly. Like if you've got 13 starters in a start 10, Rocky, that's exactly right. Let's go launch into some big trades.
Yeah.
And I think too, if there are a couple of trades that I've made in past years where there is no trade deadline, and the trade that I made on paper looks terrible, where it's like I overpaid, but the guy one of the guys that I was trading away was just sitting on my bench. So even if it's an incremental like 5 points a week, and I'm trading 2 guys that score 10 points for 1 guy that scores 15 points, right? Something like that, where it's like, why would you trade that away? Like you can get so much more. Like, honestly, I don't think I could. The time frame is very short. You only have so many trade partners. Like you kind of have to make riskier moves in the offseason. And that's kind of where I wanted to hit on some of this too, is like, if I'm contending, if I'm in the playoffs and I'm making moves, it's to add points to my starting lineup. That's all I care about. So I 100% agree with you, Dustin.
Yeah, it's all about stacking those points and stacking for future. And if you can trade a guy who's, if you can tier up, I'm all for that, right? If a guy's scoring you 10 points on your bench, he's scoring you 0 points.
That's exactly right.
So you take
he
10
might as well be
points,
scoring you 0.
10 points and 0 points for 15 points. I'll take it.
Yep. That's actually, that's exactly how I look at it. And I think too, maybe to my detriment in some leagues, but I'm very willing to send picks if I'm contending.
Yep.
Right. Like that's the same logic. Picks aren't scoring me any points. I would much rather send a second and a player for a better player.
Yep.
Or a first and a player for a stud. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. And we're actually going to talk about that with the one trade we have on the sheet tonight is a perfect example of that. But the logic that we're all getting into, and I'm sure everybody who's listening is already kind of familiar with this, but the playoffs are obviously a different time, and it's a sort of a different mindset. Some different rules come into play, so you have to kind of change your valuations a little bit. And I know sometimes that can be really, tricky or just generally difficult, I guess. If that's going to be, not everybody's able or willing to do that. So that's going to be interesting to see as we get through these playoffs. And the only other question I really had on the sheet, and I think this is an interesting topic because we've seen some accountability tweets coming out, right? Some people are putting out their records and how well they're doing. And I love Twitter or X or whatever, because it's one of those things where somebody does something that they think people will like, and then they get flack for it, and then they get flack for not doing it, and then they get flack for getting flack for doing it. Like, it's just like you can't win. You know what I mean? So just don't try. But generally speaking, the topic we're getting into here is, are making the playoffs an indication of being a good dynasty manager? I'm going to argue that not necessarily alone, right? Like making the playoffs is the goal. Winning titles is the goal. So I'm not going to say you shouldn't, like not making the playoffs is fine. But if you have a valid reason, yeah, it's fine. Like if you're rebuilding and your team is just not set to win, or you just took over an orphan, like whatever excuse you need to make, right? But logically speaking, if you're making the playoffs in every league, you're probably not playing in that many close leagues, like competitive leagues. That's generally what I think. And I know Rocky is, we talked to Scott about this, Scott Sidlow, formerly of the host here, where like people that have 30, 40, 50 leagues, it's like, well, I'm not going to make it in all 50 of them. That's just ridiculous. Like, how would that even be possible? Like if the leagues are terrible leagues, I could do it. You know what I mean? Like if I'm playing with people that don't care or have checked out or, just don't check in at all, like, well then, yeah, but then does the record even matter if we don't know the quality of the league? So it kind of becomes this like, I don't know, does it matter? So I guess, Dustin, I'll kick it to you first. I guess, is that generally speaking, do you feel like playoffs are a good indication, not winning per se, just making the playoffs as a good indication of talent as a dynasty manager?
I say no. I agree with you. Like there's so many other factors that go into it. We know you don't win your league in the draft. Yeah. We know you don't necessarily win in free agency. We know it's a combination of both. And then there is luck. So where you have to avoid injuries, right? Because that can sink you. You have to be able to evaluate the right players. That matters. And I think for me, it's always process over results. So if your process on these guys is good, then that's fine. And right, you might get into a situation where I'm in 2 dynasty leagues where I'm rebuilding. So I'm not going to make playoffs, and I knew that going in. So does that make me a bad dynasty manager? No, I rebuild. And I'll push back. I don't even know if winning championships is the point of playing fantasy football. I think having fun is the point of playing fantasy.
Well, I don't know if it's the point of playing. Yeah, I agree with you. I think having fun and communicating and like connecting with people, I'm totally with you on that. But I'm saying the main reason people play, like the goal could be to have fun, but the point of it, like what we're all really trying to do is to win, right? Like if we weren't trying to win, then this isn't as fun. That's winning is fun.
I think I look at more points for as the game if you're a good dynasty manager or not, because there's going to be leagues. Now that's why people want this point versus the median nonsense, which is just ridiculous. It takes the luck out of it.
And what I was going to say too, if you're in a good league, the last spot or two is going to be for the highest point score. That doesn't make it by record too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. So, but there might be a case where you are either you're in those leagues that have points for the last two spots, and you have a really good record, but you also you don't get in because of points for, or you're in a league that doesn't have that, and you have a crappy record, but you have really ton points for, but you have a ton of points against. That's how I look at it. I think points for is the better gauge of if you're a good fantasy player or not. Because for me, that says, A, you're making the right lineup changes. You're making the right lineup decisions. You're picking up the right guys, starting them in the right weeks. You've managed your bye weeks well. That's what I like to do. I would love fantasy sites to give me a breakdown of each week points, like how much of my optimal lineup did I get every week at the end of the season. Right, so my optimal lineup for the whole 15 weeks of the regular season, whatever it is, should have been 3,000 points, and I scored 2,800. So I've missed 200 points of the season. And get a good judge of that, because I think that's where I look at it, what's a good manager or not. Are you making the right lineup decisions week in and week out, evaluating players on a weekly basis, not being locked into takes, not being locked in that this guy should start. You're looking at matchups right. Your process is good. That, to me, values you as a good fantasy player or not.
Dustin must not be in a lot of MFL leagues.
No,
well,
I'm sorry. My internet should be from like 2010, not 1999, like MFL is.
Well, MFL does that, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah. They give you your efficiency over the entire season of your starting lineup compared to what you actually could have scored.
All right, here's the deal. MFL. Now I know you're watching.
This is an MFL podcast, Dustin.
It's a pro MFL podcast.
Here's the deal. MFL is here in Madison. I'm going to go to their office one of these days and be like, listen, can we upgrade your website? Because it's like from 1944. Like, it's so outdated. Can we just update it and make it a little more user?
We can.
It's good.
Rocky,
take everything you need.
Rocky, take a breath.
I don't care what the interface is.
We're not going down this rabbit hole today, guys. We're not doing it. I'm sorry. I'm just joking. But if you want to, we can. But it's more like
we don't have a find me trade. We can just ramble about anything.
I totally understand that. Yeah, I think also the thing to bring it a little back to the point. There are some times where I think Sleeper, if I'm not mistaken, Sleeper does some things where it tries to see like against your projections. I hate that. Projections are a guess. They're a fart in the wind. I hate anything based on projections. And I think that's where, like what you're saying, and I think what Rocky was alluding to too, is MFL does based on what actual points were scored that you left on your bench, right?
Yeah.
I think, and I could be mistaken on this, but I think what I've seen on Sleeper is a lot of the times of you were projected for 107, you got 112, so you were 5% over your projected score. I don't care about that. I don't care about that at all. I care about how well am I at making decisions as opposed to how well am I against guessing what the projections are going to be. I don't care if the projections are right. I care if I'm right. And that's where I want to target my own decision. So that's to kind of hammer that point a little closer. That's what I agree with you. Like, that's what's important. Yeah.
And to get back to your original question, I mean, I pretty much agree with most of what Dustin said. And yes, points scored is definitely the most important thing. But like I said, in most of my leagues, if you score enough points, you're going to get in the playoffs. Like I have a TA 8 team where I'm like 6-8 and in 8th place. And I made it because I was the highest scoring after the top 5 seeds. Yeah. But I would say, and I would take rebuilding as I get that. If you're rebuilding, obviously it doesn't matter. On teams you're trying to win, I do think playoffs are an indication of being a good dynasty manager. I think championships are not.
There you go. Yeah. That's why I wanted to clarify
championships
that.
Are largely
a little more luck.
Yeah, it's a lot more luck. I have a team. I keep talking about all my teams. I have a team last year that dominated the league, 13-1. I think I was about 350 points ahead of everybody else. Lost in the semis. Like, don't tell me that I was not a good dynasty manager in that league just because I didn't win a title. But I did make the playoffs. And I think if you know what you're doing, you should be able to make the playoffs if you're trying to make the playoffs. So
That's a good point too. Yeah. If your goal is the 101 and you get the 101, then you're a pretty good dynasty manager in my book. Like that's the goal. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, your goal isn't to win. And I think sometimes people get really bogged down with winning like percentages and like ROIs and like the numbers and the money. Like, but ultimately, like you said it perfectly, Dustin. I'm in this for fun. I'm in this to to give me a distraction from the real world.
Yeah.
I'm in this to, communicate with friends and talk about stuff and like literally, I'm in a fantasy league. It's a keeper league that I've been in for 20 years now. I would not talk to 10 of those guys if it wasn't for this league. And we still have, 50 text messages a day in that group thread. And we still communicate and ask about people's kids. And like, that's the connection that I think some people, I don't want to say forget or ignore. I don't think that's exactly true. But sometimes it gets missed, where it's like a good dynasty manager in my mind is somebody who responds to trades, who is communicating in the group chat, who is setting a lineup. Like, those are what I would consider a successful dynasty manager. If you win money and win championships, great. Obviously, again, that's the goal. Is winning is fun. I get all of that. And I'm not saying you're wrong if you disagree with me. I'm just saying that's where my head goes. Yeah. And like having a good playoff record, or like being in the playoffs you want to be in, like you said, Rocky, I agree with you. Like that's the goal. And then the luck takes over at some point. And you can't be considered a bad manager because you started Devontae Adams tonight, because of course you did. He's only got one touchdown so far, but he's not Trey Tucker. You know what I mean? Like that's the luck factor. You know what I mean? Like, well, how are we supposed to predict that? And there's no one in their right mind that was expecting to start Aiden O'Connell tonight. But if you did, you might have won your matchup. Like that's how crazy this is going to be. That's the luck factor. But over the course of a 12 or 13 week season, if you can make the playoffs, you're probably pretty good. You've filtered out some of that luck.
And I'll say this. Redraft, making the playoffs makes you a good redraft manager. Dynasty is also a multi-year thing. So don't come at me and go, I made the playoffs in 12 of my 12 leagues this year, but then you miss them all next year and you miss them all the year after that and you missed them last year. You have to be consistently good. So if you're consistently making the playoffs, then I consider you to be a good manager, because Dynasty is a multi-year strategy and league in and of itself. So redraft, you make the playoffs, you're a good redraft player. I'll get you on that. Like that's part of it. Dynasty, like show me you can do it year in and year out. Like I've seen in my dynasties, we have teams that consistently make the playoffs. They're consistently good. They consistently draft well. They consistently make good waiver pickups and good trades. That makes you a good dynasty manager. Not because you did it one time, because once is a fluke, twice is a pattern, three times is a trend. Like, I don't want flukes. I don't want a fluky manager who makes it in because they lucked out and picked up Aiden O'Connell and started him in week 15. Like, that's just luck. Show me you can do it.
I totally agree. And I will add a little layer to that and just say that this year, I feel like I've been luckier than any year ever. Like I'm that guy that's like 6 and 8, but like not even like fifth in scoring, but like I'll be 6 and 8 and somehow end up sixth place. And we don't have a points for tiebreak or anything. And I end up in the playoffs. I'm like, I guess I'm in the playoffs. Like I don't deserve this. You know what I mean? Like it's like, what am I doing here? So like I've got to be honest, like looking at my leagues this week too, and kind of getting things set up and seeing how the playoffs were lining up, I was surprised at how lucky I got. And I think that's part of the twist too, is that sometimes somebody can get really lucky and it can look like really skillful. And I don't think that's true all the time. It can be true sometimes. Both of them can line up, right? But I think generally, if you're lucky, I don't know if that makes you a good dynasty manager, because luck is the one thing you can't control and you can't consistently see, right? And actually, that I'll bring that into maybe like the last point. I wanted your opinion because, again, I have an opinion and I want to hear what you guys say. But Rocky, which do you prefer, rebuilding or contending? I know it's kind of a broad question. We're not getting into format. We're not getting into money. We're not getting into league. Like, we just in general, which do you prefer in a dynasty league?
Yeah, I think if you ask like a big sample of dynasty managers, a lot of them, I think more than half are going to say rebuilding. Like, and I'm the opposite. I love winning, and I love the. I guarantee you, over half will say, "What do you like better, the off season or the point scoring season?" And I like the point scoring. That's what we have the whole off season for, is for this.
I know you and Russ always battle about that too.
Yeah, I love this part. I mean, I love the non-point scoring season. I love the trades. I love the value. Just doing stuff for value. I love the rookie drafts, but this is what you do all that for. And I love seeing it come to fruition. I love winning championships. I love the week to week. I just,
you wacky dude.
Yeah, I know. Call me crazy, but I can never understand the people who prefer the off season. I'm sure Dustin's now going to be one of those people.
Well,
but I just, not that I don't like it. I would much rather be winning and scoring points.
Dustin, what do you think?
I mean, I do love the offseason because I love to trade, but I do agree. I love to win. And I think contending is a lot more fun
Yes.
in the right context for me. I want to contend because I won the offseason. I want to contend because I won the draft. I want to contend because I won on trades. I want to contend because I won in free agency and on my fab. That's how I want to win. And I think that starts for me. It starts in the offseason, right? It starts in my evaluations of rookies. It starts in my evaluations of free agency and who I trade and who I don't trade, who I'm trading away. So I traded in the league last year and I got Kyron Williams in the offseason. And people are like, oh, that's such, you paid too much for Kyron Williams. I was like, okay, cool. And all of a sudden, Kyron Williams is going off, and they're like, "Oh, you have Kyron Williams?" I'm like, "Yeah." Remember when you all laughed at? And even someone brought up, they're like, "Remember we all laughed at Dustin for Kyron Williams, and now he's winning them games." I was like, "Yeah, I won. Thank you." Like to me, that's feather in my cap. I won. That's me winning. I agree. Winning is much more fun. Contending is much more fun because that means that I've won the other phases of fantasy and dynasty.
I like that. You know, it goes
Yeah.
back to sort of what you said before about when we were talking about, you know, if it makes you a good dynasty manager, that goes to the consistency. And it's even more gratifying when you can do that. And like I have a league I run where I've made the playoffs the whole 5 years the league's been in existence, and it's super gratifying. And I'm the 1 seed again this year. Like, you know, my team is obviously totally different than it was in 2019 or 18 or whatever it was. But yet I'm still consistently in the play, only one stinking title, but I'm consistently in the playoffs every year.
Oh, so you must be a terrible dynasty manager. You only got one title,
only one
right?
title. Yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that it kind of all ties together there. Like that's such a good point with the year over year in dynasty. Yeah.
The other part of this though is kind of back to the original point we made too, which was it depends on what you define as fun.
Yeah.
You know, there are some people I know that I'm in some leagues with people that are just in a consistent perpetual rebuild. And like they just seem to always be trading for picks and trading away points for picks and looking into the future and like, oh, well, after week 3, I'm 0-3. It's worth time to pivot to the future. Like they just kind of, I don't want to say give up too soon, but that's giving up before I would, because the first one is the best chance, right? But if you're only playing 3 weeks a year, which basically some teams are, right?
Yeah.
After 3 weeks, you're 3-0. Okay, now I'm contending. I don't think that's how it should be. You need more time. But all the people out there, and I know this is talked about on Trade Addicts, and we've talked about it, like you want to be the first to the post. You want to be the first one who decides to pivot into that rebuild. But if you find yourself consistently doing it and you're having fun with it, I'm all for it. Like if that's what you want to do. But the things I don't like is when I've seen some dynasty managers that complain about how they always have to rebuild. And I'm like,
it's your own fault.
It's sort of like, it's like, well, he's like the what's the sketch where he's wearing the hot dog outfit? Like, who did this? Like, I wonder who's doing. Like, you did this, brother. Like, you put the stick in your own bicycle wheel. Like, what are you? Like, you're the one who's in charge of this team. You're the GM making these decisions. Like, I don't know what more you want from yourself. You know what I mean? Like, go do something different if that's not helpful for you, or if it's not fun for you, right? So that's always what blows my mind is the perpetual rebuilders that are upset about how they never win. I'm like, well, maybe you should contend for a change.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to mention this whole like rebuild versus contending and off season versus in season. What if you're rebuilding? I actually think one of the most fun times to be rebuilding is during the season,
the playoffs. I was
you
just
can get
say
such wacky values. On especially if you're starting a rebuild and you still have some of those veteran guys, you can get stuff you will never get in March or April.
Yep.
Well, especially with the injuries that we've seen, right? Like when Justin Herbert goes down, and we're going to talk about that, but like there are some trades that are happening now that we're going to look back on in even 2 months and are going to go, what?
Even if you're talking minor deals, like you can get something for Joe Flacco right now,
or Jake Browning.
Getting something for Joe Flacco 4 months ago.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I think you strategically pick up backup quarterbacks. So, right, if you have Joshua Dobbs, you traded Joshua Dobbs and probably got a second for him this year.
Or I held on to him and now it's worthless.
Now it's worthless. Right? So, right, if you capitalized on Josh Dobbs, you got a second round pick, which turns into a future flex play for you, and Joshua Dobbs is worthless now. Right? If you picked up Jake Browning and then Joe Burrow, you could have flipped him for a second round. I did it a couple years ago. I picked up Colt McCoy and I had room on my bench for 2 weeks, and then Kyler Murray got hurt. I traded him for a third round pick because I was rebuilding, and I was able to trade away, pick a third round pick. That third round pick, I think, turned into Puka. So like the value there is crazy.
That's that's rare though. Like let's be clear, not every player in the third is Puka, but I like your point. You're exactly right. Like everything you can add to your team is helpful.
Because every draft pick is an asset. And I think people get lost in this, stuck in this, like, I have these draft picks. I have to draft well with that draft pick for hit. No, you have to utilize that asset the best you can, whether that's drafting or trading it to move up or get players. Like, having more assets makes it easier for you to pivot however you want. Just because you have 5 first-round picks in the 2024 draft doesn't mean you have to pick 5 players. You can use those to go out and get an Amon. You can use 2 and go get Amon St. Brown. Like, why not? You don't have to necessarily draft and hit on all 5 players. We talk about this all the time that, like, oh, the hit rate on second-round picks in Dynasty draft is so low. Cool. I don't necessarily have to draft with my second-round pick. Why can't I trade him for a James Conner and get 2 years out of him? Why can't I trade it for a guy who's going to play in my flex? I don't need to draft someone and hope I hit. I can trade him for players that have value.
Yeah. And I think that's the other part of this, too, is kind of back to Rocky's point about the offseason or the non-point scoring season. And the moves that you can make there are all going to be speculation. There is no points. Points don't matter. But right now in the playoffs, points matter more than they ever will any other time. Like, now is the time to go get the value you can and get those points off your roster and all that. So that's what I think is so fun about the playoffs in general. Again, we can talk about what we saw last week and what we're looking into this week. But Rocky, I know you don't like that anyway. But it's also like there isn't really much to talk about, right? Like, everybody's already paying attention. You already know what's going on. Like, this is crazy. This is going to be one of those things where as we get into the off season, as we pivot more toward that non-point scoring season, the week-to-week stuff doesn't matter as much. You should have your lineup pretty much set by this point. There are no buys to really worry about. Your roster should be at 100%, or at least as much as it can be. Again, with injuries, of course, it can't be. But I'm just saying, like, you shouldn't really need to be like, man, maybe this is a little bit of a soapbox, but I don't really like or understand start-sit questions in the playoffs. People say, oh, it's for the playoffs. This matters the most. Who should I start? I almost always just say, well, who got you there? Like, who do you want to start? Like, I don't want to be in charge of your team. Like, who do you think you should start? That's who you should go with. Like, go with your gut. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone with my gut and it stunk and it hurt and my gut got smarter, right? And so then I'm like, all right, I got to learn that lesson. I can't just lean on Rocky to tell me what to do with every player. Like, that's just not fair. Not only is it not fair to Rocky, but then if it works, I'm taking the credit. If it doesn't, Rocky's getting the blame. That's not okay. Yeah. Right. Like, you have to own your own teams. And I think the playoffs are where some people really get over their own skis or just overthink it. And they start going, oh my God, I really need to win. I really need to win. Like, no, you don't. Just start your best lineup, give it your best. And that's the best you can do. The game of luck is going to come into play here. And I've talked about this over and over. Everybody, if you've listened, I get it. But the luck is why we play the game, right? Yeah. If it was so predictable and the projections were 100% accurate, I don't think I'd be doing this. No. Like, this would be such a boring waste of time. So live in the chaos. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but just expect the unexpected. Like, just go in with the mindset that it's going to be a little wonky. And you're going to see Pat Mahomes, of course, this week had a terrible week, right? He was expecting to win. He got a ticky-tack call, whatever, and it just blew up. And I'm like, and I'm just saying, part of me is like, I know you're a Bills fan, Dustin.
Ticky tack. I mean, come on, he was offside.
I put quotes around it. He was offsides all game, and I think that's what makes it. I think I get some of the logic is that he was offsides multiple times and they didn't call it until then. Yeah. But at some point, don't you have to call it? You know what I mean? Like, it gets to be like a chicken and egg. Like, who was in the wrong here? The logic I'm going by here is you can't legislate all that out. You cannot remove the human element from this game. So lean into it. And just be ready for it. And just be like, hey, I might win a week by 0.2 and then lose a week by 0.2. And you just kind of have to let it all wash over you, man. Just let it go, man. There's only so much you can control in this world. And I guarantee you, this is not one of them. As much as you want to spend time on it, it's not going to outcome 100% the way you want.
Yeah. And here's the deal. Like, when it comes to sit starts, for me, it's really simple. I look at opportunities. I look at matchup. That's all I need to do. I don't need to look at, like, the rate of the offense and air yards and all these acronyms. What are they doing lately?
Yeah.
What's the matchup look like?
Yep.
High volume, good matchup, start them. Low volume, bad matchup, don't start them. If it's one or the other, then you make.
I think you just solved football, Dustin. That's exactly.
But right, even with that, you're going to have guys that just don't pan out, that have a good matchup and have good volume, and all of a sudden just lay eggs. That's the luck in fantasy football. Yep. But I think people get into this, like, these weeds of, like, well, the weather and the home game and the dome and this and home road splits. And I don't know. I posted now, this is my second week. I posted the NFL narratives. I do birthday games, revenge games.
I love that. Yeah.
Dude, that tweet has blown up because people want that stuff. And I'm like, they're like, oh, I can't wait. I'm like, it doesn't matter. That stuff, it matters a little bit. and it gives him a little extra money, but like that shouldn't factor into your massive of like, oh my gosh, now Zach Moss is like going to be the running back one because it's his birthday on tomorrow and his game's on Saturday. Does it give him a little extra juice? Sure, but you should be starting Zach Moss because of the volume and the matchup. Now I go, okay, so I think he's a low end RB1. Maybe he's a mid range RB1 because it's his birthday. Cool. It's not it's a tiebreaker, not a decision.
That's a way to put it. Yeah. And I'll even say, like, I use a lot of that stuff more for prop betting than I do for fantasy.
The betting junkies.
Yeah.
Love that tweet. I picked up almost 400 Twitter followers, and it's got like 200,000 views because the junkies got all over that. And they were like,
Hunter Henry. Honestly, that got me money last week. I bet on Hunter Henry. I saw your tweet. I'm like, oh hell yeah, I'm betting on Hunter Henry. It's his birthday. Like, and it worked out perfect.
It was plus 750. So if you bet $1, you won 750. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'm happy
I bet
people
$5.
won.
I won like $40 or something. I was like, hell yeah, let me go.
Happy for it. Happy people that cashed on that. Like, and and I've said this week, right? It's Zach Moss. It's a D-Hop revenge game. It's an Ayuk return to Arizona game. And I liked Irv Smith and then maybe Braxton Berrios. If you play all 5 of those in like a $1 parlay, it's probably probably a couple thousand, probably $1,000 you can win. Like, it's real good money.
I'll be making a bet after the show.
Okay.
That sounds like a good one. I like it. It's just, if nothing else, it's fun. And how many times do we see those narrative things come off? I mean, honestly, that's just as dumb as it is. There's so many times where I'm like, how did I not see that coming? Of course, it's a revenge game. Like, God dang, like it happens every
time.
I love it. Yeah.
And that's why I post them, because it's just a fun, again, it's a narrative, not a factor.
Correct.
It's a tiebreaker, not the decision maker.
It's a feeling, not a fact, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's vibes. I love vibes. That's what betting should be, especially long shots and parlays. I'm a big fan of that. All right. Well, was there anything else you guys wanted to talk about regarding the playoffs? I feel like we covered a lot of good topics there, and hopefully our listeners are learning a little bit and understanding a little bit more about how to be better dynasty managers. But anything we missed, Dustin, that you can think of?
No, I think in the playoffs, I look at how far do I really think I can go in the playoffs. If I'm the 6 seed and I'm going to play the 2 seed and then the 1 seed, like, and then that's the thing you have to make some, like, if you just sneaked in, like you said, Andrew, like you made it because you're like, I didn't realize I'd make the playoffs. Surprise, you're in. Maybe you probably should just rebuild, like pack it in, like you exceeded your expectations. It goes on expectations for the year. If I'm rebuilding, then I know I'm going to rebuild. What's my expectation? If I was like, hey, I'm borderline and I make it, then I've exceeded my expectations. Let me go and just kind of be happy that I exceed expectations. Again, as long as you're having fun, then that year is successful. And here's the thing. We talk about money and return on investment. Realistically, for most leagues, you have to win once every 6 years to break even. Don't worry about the return on investment. Just win once and then just be happy that you broke even for 6 years. Yep. If you're in a $25 league and let's say the winner gets $300, like you have to win every 8 years to like break even. Stop worrying about return on investment. And I made all this money and I was in this big cash league. Whoopty frickin' do. Like, you win once, you're good. If you're spending $100 to be in a league, then obviously you feel comfortable that you can lose $100. Don't be like, I won this $100 league. The price of entry doesn't necessarily make your league better or worse. Correct. It's just what you're willing to lose, and other people might not be.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. Rocky, anything else you wanted to add about playoffs before we move on tonight, or are we good?
No, I think we pretty much said it all. I did like Ryan's comment in chat because I was wondering the same thing. Does Brandon Staley still have a job by the time we wake up tomorrow?
Yeah, this is a good pivot, and I don't. I'll say this. My let's talking about vibes, right? Vibes. My vibes is he stays because this team has had so many chances to get rid of him. I don't know what makes this any different.
Because it's 56-7 to the Raiders. That's what makes it.
Listen, I know, but they're 5-8 without Justin Herbert. He's got all the excuses in the world. It doesn't this is just not a good team. It hasn't.
I think that dude deserves to be fired, though. He's shown nothing that he's a good coach.
I'm not. Facts say he should be. Vibes say he won't be. That's what I'm saying. Like I get the.
Yeah, I mean they don't have to do it today. I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone by the end of the year, though.
Yeah. Here's what I say.
The end of the year makes way more sense.
He's done at the end of the year. What do you benefit by firing him tomorrow? Right, like you get a little more investment from your players. Maybe if you really think Kellen Moore is the future, maybe you do it so you can see. If you think Kellen Moore is your future coach, you fire him to see what Kellen Moore is for the last 4 games. But if you don't think Kellen Moore is a potential head coach, you don't fire Staley right now because you don't benefit from it. You don't get anything. All you get is, hey, we look like a crappy run franchise. You get that the owner is quick to make decisions. Like, just let it play out.
I do think is a good point though. Like he is a potential future head coach. It might not be a bad idea to see what he can do.
Yeah, if you think he's a future head coach and you think he could be your head coach, You fire him and let's see what Kellen Moore can do for games. But your expectations for Kellen Moore has to be low.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, ironically though, Rocky, right after you mentioned that 56-7, they got a pick 6, so now it's 63-7.
Absolutely.
This
It's
team
just
is
the
imploding by the
embarrassment,
minute.
like
That was
I
a
can
hell of
see
a
it
play
happening,
too.
that the owners are just so
Like a first play pick 6.
embarrassed. Yeah,
I don't know what I would, if I was the Chargers, I would have fired Staley a year ago. So like at this point,
Yeah.
I'm clearly not the Chargers. That's kind of where my head goes. Like this is not a normal franchise.
I might
But
fire
again,
him in the
hell of a
middle of the
defense.
fourth quarter here.
Well,
I mean, that,
at what point did they mercy rule this? This
Yeah,
is different
I
than the
know.
Dolphins. This is like a JV team playing a college team. You know what I mean? Like this is like high school. This is just
Yeah, like at
terrible.
least the Dolphins are good. Like they have, Waddle and Tyreek and Achan and
That was more of
Mostert
like
and-
the logic in my head is like that was more of a push than a pull. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that was one of those like, well, they're just pushing for the win as opposed to this one. They're like getting pulled up because the other team's so bad.
You're
It's just-
doing this to against friggin' Zamir White and Aiden O'Connell and Brandon Bolden and Trey Tucker.
and yeah.
and here's what I'll say: if you're in a league and you're in a dynasty league, put in a waiver for Max Duggan because I don't think Easton Stick starts next week.
I
There
agree.
you go.
We might see
That's a
some
great
Max
point.
Duggan who back-to-back national championships, or not? No, that's Bennett. But Max Duggan looked good at the combine. Like I think he's a value play. They're probably going to start him next week, so you could scoop up Max Duggan. If you don't have a trade deadline, you can scoop him up now, and someone may get injured, and you can trade him for a third-round pick next week.
Or who knows? He could be like the Brock Purdy style where he comes in and blows up and is everybody's name in the offseason, and you can trade him for a second in January. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like you never know. Speaking of quarterbacks, I know this was one that Chad put in the chat a while ago. I want to bring it up
Yes.
because we're talking about it. But if you're set at QB, don't believe in neighbors and have Kyle Pitts, do you trade away the 1.01 if MHJ, Marvin Harrison Jr. stays, or do you just pull the ripcord on Bowers at 101? I guess this is getting more into Devi than I usually like to get into, and we're still way too far away for me to answer with any sort of an intelligent sort of thing because we don't know landing spots, we don't know draft capital, we don't know who's coming out or not, right?
Well,
So
one
this is a
thing
lot of ifs.
One thing I can say about this question, because he's saying if you're set at QB, which
If
makes
you're
me
set at
assume
QB,
super flex. I don't
correct.
care if you're set at QB. Draft Caleb Williams, regardless.
That was going to
of-
be my point. Like if
Yeah.
you're set at QB, you still draft a QB. Like I don't think there's any reason you would skip quarterback in a super flex league like that at the 101. I just don't think that makes sense. Even if MHJ is a generational talent and phenomenal, the quarterback position, we were just talking about, the quarterback position is so valuable and receivers are somewhat replaceable. And again, I hate to say that. I'm not saying MHJ is going to be terrible or anything like that, but no, don't reach for Marvin.
And-
Definitely go with the quarterback.
Don't
Whoever
go with Bowers.
the best. Yeah.
But
Chad says he's too set at QB. I just want to say it doesn't matter. Like especially a guy like Caleb Williams specifically is going to be worth so much more than one first round
draft and
pick.
trade. Draft
Yeah.
and trade. Yeah.
I,
And mean,
I would trade out of the 101.
it's
if you're
one
set at
QB. Hang
Or
on. One
that,
QB
yeah.
changes everything.
Okay.
One QB changes
Oh,
everything.
you're one
Definitely
QB,
go
yeah.
more. You don't draft
Definitely.
a QB at 101. Definitely. Okay. So that
No.
makes so much more sense. So yeah, you're set at QB as in you're correct. That makes total sense.
I would also say if it's one QB, I'm not drafting a QB at the 101.
I was just going to say that too. Like, no, I'm not drafting a QB in the first round. Probably.
But he's
I
saying
never have.
then the 101 in a single quarterback is either Marvin Harrison. If he's not there, then it's
Yeah.
Bowers or Neighbors.
Neighbors,
Is a 101. I think if that case, I'm still trading out of 101. I think either way, I'm trading out of 101 because I think you can move back to 4 and still get a guy in that tier and then pick up either a late first or an early second. That's what I did last year. I had the 101. I was set at running back, so I traded out because someone wanted Bijan. I needed a quarterback, so I traded it back to 3. It went Bijan, Richardson, and I took the gamble and traded from 3 to 4. And I am still getting CJ Stroud at 4, but I picked up Will Levis. I picked up a second, which I think I have to look back at who I got, but I picked up like a lot of value, and I picked up a first next year, all because I knew that I didn't want Bijan. I wanted CJ Stroud, and I knew I could move back a couple spots and still be in that same tier. So I think if you're looking at a wide receiver, and as we get closer, we'll see the tiers, and I think it's going to be, I think that tier is probably going to be 3 receivers, and Brock Bowers is going to be that first tier for me in a 1 QB league. So anywhere in the top 4, I'm okay with. So if you can move back to 4 and pick up a first next year and maybe a second or a late first this year and a second, go for it because I don't think the value drop off is that much because you're going to be in the same first tier.
Well, and I'll even kind of add on to that and just make sure to remind you, don't trade now. Like there's no reason to trade your 101 right now. Like just hold on because picks are accruing in value every minute. You don't trade that pick. It's going up. And the only time I wouldn't even say panic, but the only time I really send offers if I have a 101 is either I'm sending a really ridiculous offer, like 101 for the 103 and the next year's first and the next year's first, like some crazy trade that there's no way they say yes to, but if they do, I'm happy. Or I'm waiting until I'm on the clock and then I'm sending the trade. You know what I mean? Like there's no reason to make a trade right now. Just don't do that. But I get the logic. That's fair. If it's a 1 QB league, that does change some of it. But I'm just like, he's not even mentioning. I'm so used to Superflex. Honestly, I'm only in like one QB league anymore. So my brain just like yours, Rocky. I was like, well, no, you got to go QB. Anyway,
well, yeah, and he said if I'm set at QB,
that,
which is what made me think that, like the fact that he prefaced it by talking about QB.
How did we not see that? How did I not notice that till now that Jacoby Myers threw that touchdown pass to Devontae Adams?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't catch that either. But honestly, that's how wild this game is right now.
It's insane.
We are gonna go to our next segment, and one of the last, I guess, technically, which is our listener league updates. And again, I know Rocky, you're not a huge fan of these, but I want to give the listeners some love. They follow us all year. The least we can do is give them some help.
I don't mind these. I did it last time I was hosting.
I'm just giving you a hard time. But also, there was only one trade this week, and this is on topic with what we talked about before, and it was in Dynasty Junkies 2, which hurt me a little bit, but that's okay. So Justin Herbert and a first for Jalen Hurts. And in Dynasty Junkies 2 and 3, we allow the 1 seed gets a bye. The 2nd seed then gets to pick their opponent. The 3rd seed goes next. And so you get to pick your matchups in those leagues.
Okay.
So I picked Dynasty Mercer, who is the one who sent Justin Herbert and a first. I thought, you know what? He's got Herbert. He just got hurt. Like he's going to struggle to find some replacement. Like it's not going to be that great. So I was the 2nd seed, I believe, and I picked Mercer. And then he goes and trades for Jalen Hurts. I am unhappy. But that is not a reason to not have a trade deadline. This was an entirely legal trade. Yeah. It was before the week started. But this is exactly why you have a trade deadline. Or sorry, why you don't have to. This is exactly why you don't have a trade deadline, right? This is because it's in the playoffs. It matters. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm also looking at it like, my goodness, this is going to be a lot tougher week. So I guess, Rocky, when you saw this trade come through, I know you weren't worried about me, but what did you think of the trade in general when you saw this one come through your email?
I think it's a really good trade. I get from both sides. I actually
really
like the Herbert and the first side though. Because I mean that team is not a playoff team, obviously, and I mean especially this year, there's definitely a drop off from Hurts to Herbert.
Yes,
but we've seen what Herbert can do. And maybe firing Staley will help, as we were talking about, and they bring in an offensive coach. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and you know me and quarterbacks anyway. I love the idea. If I could, I have Hurts in quite a few leagues because I bought him before he really became the Jalen Hurts he is now. Like after his 2nd year, I think, where he was.
Oh, you were on the Hurts train early. I remember.
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, and I'm sure some people thought it was homerism, but and maybe a little bit that was in there because I am an Eagles fan. But I just saw the potential there, like. You know, the way he can run the ball, and he's improved as a passer year over year, pretty much every year, going back to college. So anyway, that's not really the point. Just that again, this is totally the thing I like to do. Like I would move Hurts for Herbert in the first. I love to tear down at quarterback, and you're not even tearing down that much.
Yeah.
And this is potentially, if Mercer loses to you, this is like the 108. I think.
Yeah, it's like a mid.
It's
would be a
14-team league, so
and that's why it was his own. Yeah, it was his own first, right? So that's part of the algorithm on this is you're sending points to a team that you're getting the pick back from. So in theory, you're hurting. In theory, again, you're hurting the value of that first round pick by making this trade. So you've got to take that into account or whatever. I'm with you though. I still would. If I'm not contending, I don't want Hurts. There's no reason. Give me the extra pick. Give me Herbert. Give me the upside. So again, this was one of those trades that I saw it and immediately I was like, oh, that's a fair trade. And then it, like, I don't know, an hour went by and my head was like, wait a minute, that's not good for me. Like, oh crap, I picked Mercer.
And that's the other thing. I mean, it is a fair, even though I keep saying I want the Herbert side, like I get it from Mercer's side. I wouldn't want to pay up that much, but it's great for him. Hurts is, you know, fantastic. And now that he's not playing the Niners and Cowboys, I think he'll be a little better too. These last few games during the playoffs, he's got like the Seahawks and Giants and the Cardinals or something like that. So I love it for Mercer, but I also would rather have the Herbert side.
What about you, Dustin?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think I would want the Herbert in the first side. I think the tier down, it's not even that much of a tier down from Hurts to
It's
Herbert.
within a tier in some places. I mean, depending on how you rank.
Yeah,
in Dynasty,
I think the true fair deal would have been Herbert in a second for Hurts. But I mean, if you need Hurts, you need Hurts. Like that's what you got to give to get Hurts. Like if you need the points because you lost Herbert, so I think Mercer getting Herbert if he's basically out is fine, and you pick up that person. I don't have a problem with it. I think it does play into this whole like where they're at and what that pick's going to be and what that looks like down the road. But I think it's a fine trade. I think the Herbert in the first side is definitely worth more than Jalen Hurts. But right, it's production now versus no production now.
Well, and that's exactly why trades need to happen in the playoffs, because this is the kind of trade, even in 6 months, you might look at this and go, holy crap, you got a whole first on top of Herbert or, for Hurts, like that's a crazy amount. And then it might be the other way entirely. We don't know, but
and also
no points.
If this does pay off big time for Mercer and he wins, that could be the 114. It's his own first.
It's true. That's exactly right.
14 team league, which would actually be what we think of as a second, because my brain anyway works in terms of 12 teams. So it would basically be an early second. So it could work out even better for him if Jalen Hurts goes bonkers here and helps carry him to a title.
Well, again, I've got a couple shares of Hurts in leagues that I really need to win this week, so I'd be okay with it as long as I can still somehow win in this one. But no, I thought that was again very fair trade, and sorry, and again, I'm very nervous for my week now, but that's okay. But that's what I love about the picking your opponent.
You're all choked up over it. I can tell.
I know. I can't, for some reason, just can't get. Just my body is telling me no. Like this is terrible. No, I love that the draft that we do, right? Where it's like you get to pick your opponents. I think that's a fun little wrinkle, and it makes it a little bit more like personalized in a sense.
I do that in all my leagues that I run. The
that's a cool twist.
That's playing that week gets to pick their opponent. Well, I also just a little tiny little commish type thing. There's a lot of, we talked about it earlier. There's a lot of leagues where the 6th seed is points. I think that makes it more fair for the 3 seed, because sometimes it's not fair to the 3 seed if you have to play that team, and they might be better than the 5 or even the 4 seed if we're going by points for. So you get to pick your opponent, and you don't necessarily have to play that super high scoring team.
That's a good point.
Yeah. That's another reason I like to do it that way.
Well, and while we're talking about this, what are your thoughts on potential points? I'm not a fan of potential points. I personally feel like that's more of like evaluating your roster, and it takes lineup decisions out of it. And I don't know if that's entirely fair, because sometimes for myself anyway, for a while in a lot of leagues, I just wasn't really focusing on the lineup after a few weeks, or like it was a rebuilding team or something. I'm like, I don't really care. But because I was potential points was how it was sorted, I got the 105 instead of the 103. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, why are we doing potential points? Like, just because I didn't set a lineup, well, that's why, is to get you active and all this. It wasn't like I was setting bad lineups. I just was making more riskier plays. Where I'm like,
potential points doesn't have anything to do with setting your lineup, though. That's why I like points.
Well, that's true.
You're incentivized to set a lineup, because
I'm thinking of the sleeper potential. Like the sleeper potential is like all your points. Like it's your bench points and everything. Like that's the total points is maybe what I'm thinking of, not potential.
Well, that's what MFL does too for potential points. It's all your
I'm just saying, like, I don't want my bench to impact my draft position. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, see, then I'm the total opposite of you. I think your entire roster, the potential points reflects your entire roster. The worst roster should get the number 1 pick,
right?
Regardless if you set bad lineups and you end up with a worse record because of that. That to me doesn't mean you should get a worse pick.
What I'm saying though is there are leagues. I agree with your logic there, but there are leagues where Trey Tucker goes off on my bench because that was the smart decision to bench Trey Tucker. And now I'm getting dinged for it because he's
Trey Tucker and that doesn't have anything. You had him on your roster. That's the problem.
Right. He's on my roster. That's what I'm saying. He's on my roster.
Doesn't matter whether you started him or not.
But this is a fluke. There's no way this makes any sense. You know what I'm saying? Like this happens over and over and over. Like I get what your point is, and I'm not really arguing.
Well, and everyone likes to make that argument. Every single manager in your league has a Trey Tucker game.
No, I understand that. But so I'm saying like
it's all a wash.
I know.
It annoys you if it happens in week 17 and it costs you the 101 instead of the 10. You get the 102 instead of the 101.
What I was literally just saying was the 105 and 103, and that's what I've seen it happen all directions. I agree with you, and I was just saying like we're not taking the human element out, but potential points just is like I know it takes too much of the luck out. I guess is what I'm saying. Like the luck and lineup setting is something that I think needs to be rewarded or not rewarded, but it also like if your league is something where you're getting players that are starting like is it Dugan? Is that his name? I don't even know the
Max
guy.
Duggan, yeah.
Like let's say somebody started Duggan this week. right? You're like, okay, well, that makes very little sense. Like, that's not great. So in that case, potential points probably makes a lot of sense. But my thought is more like potential points can sometimes, yes, it does come out in the wash. But if I'm rebuilding and I have a bunch of young receivers on my roster, they're technically, that makes my roster better. I agree with you. But also, like, they're not in my lineup. They're not good enough to get in the lineup. Nobody would ever be starting them. And the starters we were just talking about, starters are all we care about. So, like, the better starting lineup is really more important than the total roster. But I see both sides. I see both sides. I'm not trying to argue too much.
I think your entire roster I think it's fine that your draft pick reflects your entire roster. And like I said, I hate the argument that crappy player X or not, low end prospect X went off on my bench and now it cost everybody the entire year. So the lineup setting thing, I get your point there that maybe you want to factor in how good of a lineup setter you are, but I don't like having lineup manipulation. Like
I mean, there's no answer.
You're
there's
right
no, like,
for that. Yeah, I don't like people getting better picks because I hate people not setting their best lineup anyway. Yes.
Well,
and
so that's where I'm pro tank
for that.
I'm pro tank. Like, I feel like if you want to get the 101 and you want to show us a crappy lineup, that's fine. Go for it.
I'm pro rebuild. I'm not pro tank.
I'm pro tank in the sense of if that's your plan to rebuild and you want to donate your money this year, then I'm fine with it. That's how I am. And again, I'm not saying you have to agree with it. That's where I think we disagree a lot, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
But like, I am definitely pro rebuild. But I'm pro
anyway.
Well, again, it comes out in the wash. Didn't you just say that? Like, I'm playing every team.
Not if you decide to do it mid-season once you're out of it.
Well, sure, but also it could affect me one year and not the next year.
We're arguing back and forth. Let Dustin talk.
I agree that I don't love potential points because I think it hurts. Well, I guess it helps people that have injured players if you don't have a lot of IR spots. So if you have Demario Pop Douglas from the Patriots, who's been injured, and you, let's say, don't have an IR spot, he's on your thing, so you don't have a ton of potential points because he's not playing. I think it takes that out of it. It takes out the let me get a rookie quarterback that might be sitting for a year. Let me get a Will Levis. What his potential points first half of the season were nothing because he wasn't playing, but his potential for the future is different. I am not pro tank. I think you should have to set a least competitive lineup. You shouldn't be able to start Will Levis in week 1 when he's clearly not starting. You shouldn't be able to start clear and obvious, like, hey, this guy's not even playing and you're benching. You shouldn't be able to bench Stephon Diggs because you don't want to start because you want to lose. Like, that's not okay to me. That's upsetting the balance and competitive balance of the league because you're right, Rocky. There's going to be guys that 6 weeks in go, I'm out. I'm just going to start. And then those first 6 weeks, people were playing a good team or an okay team, and now the other weeks are playing basically crap. Yeah. You shouldn't be able to do that.
And I agree with that. You can keep going. I just want to mention too, though, that that's part of that is why I'm such a big pro potential points guy, is because I'm a very anti-tank guy. Like, if you're doing potential points, there's literally zero reason to do that where you start Will Levis. That's not giving you any points because it doesn't matter.
Correct. No, what I'm saying is more like I'm making trades. Like I said before, I'm sending away one good player for 3 guys with upside. Right? Like, that's my point in the tank, is like I'm trying to trade away points for future potential. But that future potential comes in earlier, and I'm not starting those players because let's say I've got 9 receivers for 3 slots or something, right? Like, I can't start all 9 of them. Starting points is all that matters in championships, right? So like, let's say I've got 6 receivers on my team. Yeah, my roster is better, but I can't start them all. So like, what's the point? They're zeros. We were just talking about that, right? A 10 on your bench is a 0. But not for potential points. It counts for potential points. Like, I just feel like it's too inconsistent. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I want to reward lineup setting more than deep benches and having a good bench. I think having a good bench is great for your future potential, but I don't think it should matter into your draft pick because I don't want I think rebuild should take 2 years. So if I'm in the first year of a rebuild, I might have guys who aren't going to play this year, but that might be good next year, and I don't want to necessarily be rewarded because of that. I want to reward it because I don't have a competitive lineup. So I agree though. I'm anti-tanking. I think that's why I love loser punishments. Like, I think that's super important to keep people from tanking, or at least make it less fun. It's still fun for everyone else. Yeah, less attractive for them. I do think needs to be that balance of like, hey, I should be able to have Will Levis on my bench and not start him for 6 games and not have that be rewarded for that because it's less potential points. So thus, I get a better draft pick. I think there needs to be the balance. But I think you can go either way.
You also have people that trade for IR players, and now they have 0 potential points. Okay, so that helps them because they traded for this future potential, but they can't score points. So I'm just saying, like, there's no right answer. I'm not trying to say I'm right. I'm just like, that's where my head goes. Like, that makes the IR players a lot more valuable. Well, is that what we want? Maybe, but I think ultimately it comes down to the thing we always talk about. It takes good managers. That's
I
always
don't
what
think it makes them that much more valuable. But anyway, I think
Well,
there's
you
a
get
lot
my
more
point.
pros
It's
to potential points than there are negatives, and there's more negatives to some of the other ways of doing it than there are positives. But
yeah,
I'll agree with you on that. I'm not even saying it's 100% anything. I'm just saying, like, there is something to be said. Like, there are times where I'm like, we're all setting good lineups, and nobody is really tanking, and yet my bench is changing my draft position. I don't enjoy that. It's just something
your
I don't
team
enjoy.
is changing your draft position.
No. It's not. Yes, you're right.
It's your team.
But then why aren't we doing potential points for the whole season? Why aren't we doing like my bench should score points in the playoffs then? Like, let me give it my whole team. Who's got the best team, right? That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Huh? That's not the same thing.
And I do think there's a point, like, what if you just stack your bench with
also with the injury
defense,
thing,
you get a lot more potential points.
I hate the compare things to the NFL, but if Jalen Hurts goes down for the year, the Eagles are getting a much better draft pick. So I don't see how, like, this argument about, if guys get injured, that doesn't hold a lot of water to me.
This has been a great discussion. I've enjoyed all of this. I think that's something I did not expect.
I am so pro
to pop
potential
off.
points. It's not even funny.
That is something I did not expect.
I'm just going to argue it until I die. So
I know, and I didn't realize that, and I've opened a can of worms. I will end with this. Thank you so much for coming tonight, Dustin. I think we had a great time chatting it up.
It was a blast.
Where can people find you? What are you doing these days? And I guess, what are you looking forward to in the next year in the fantasy space?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the DUnit13. So THEDUNIT 13. You can find all my content there. I don't have my own podcast. I just do guest spots on great shows like Dynasty Junkies and everywhere else. I've got a few that are in the can that'll be coming out in the next days and weeks, months. So that's the best place. I do stuff at dynastyprosfootball.com. I'm the content director over there. I help out with QB List. I'm our sit start director. So every Thursday, our sit starts come out. We still do them every player, every game. And we give you not just sit start, we give you a range. So we'll say, hey, we think Devontae Adams is a wide receiver 2 this week because that means he's going to score between 12 to 15 points. Same thing with quarterbacks. For running backs, we have a range that we give you. So if we say we're going to be this guy, this is the range that you can expect based on PPR scoring. I do some stuff over at Dynasty Nerds. I help out with front office pros as their growth and planning strategist. So I hop on videos when they need me. So I hopped on one last night because one of them was sick. Really, I'm looking forward to this offseason. I went to the draft and the combine last year, planning on going back this year, kind of cover those on site, which is always fun to kind of meet the prospects, get to know them a little more as people, kind of know their personalities. Where I fell in love with Roshan Johnson and Zay Flowers based on their personality, not so much their play on the field. Now their play on the field just backed it up, but their personality made me want to cheer for them even more. And just kind of looking for the offseason, kind of take a little break between Christmas and New Year's, and then hit the ground running as free agency hits and combine and draft and that whole offseason. So, and then we'll see what next year has for me. I'm growing. If you haven't followed me on Twitter, I'm trying to get to 7,000 by the Super Bowl. I'm about 200 away. So I'm looking forward to hitting that goal and just keep pumping out content. I'm available to help out. My DMs are always open, willing to help out with dynasty questions, sit start questions, trade questions, whatever it is. I'm here to be a good resource. That's my goal, is to be a good resource to those in the community, whether it's experts, fans, players, whoever it is. If you need something, I'm here to help out.
Love it. No, I love it. And you do a lot of stuff. I always see you on Twitter. We're always engaging and talking about stuff. Obviously, it was great to meet you at the expo and everything.
Yes.
So yeah, appreciate you coming on. Obviously, it was a great time. We had some good discussions. Like, this was good.
We did.
We didn't talk about players much at all. It was awesome. With that, we are going to get out of here for the night. Thanks for coming into the chat if you were in there. Thanks for listening if you're listening in your earballs. And whenever Rocky puts this up to do that, right? You can follow us at Dynasty Junkies. You can follow the DAP Network at DAP_network. Follow us on YouTube, on Twitter, of course, or X, again, whatever we're calling it. You can follow me.
It's always Twitter. It's always going to be Twitter. It'll always be Twitter.
I'm fine with that. I just feel like I have to say X. I feel like I have to say X because it's like that's technically where it goes now, and I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, I'm at Andrew Hall FF on Twitter. Rocky is at Dynasty FF Addict on Twitter. You can follow us on there. I mean, we're always glad to help and do anything we can, but definitely give us some subscribe, rate, and review kind of thing. You know, if you have some thoughts, you want to send your team in for Find Me a Trade. We didn't do that this week because of playoffs and stuff. We're not going to do that next week either. I think I'm a solo show next week too. So it's going to be helpful for me for one less thing to do. But with that, Rocky, why don't you get us out of here for the night?
Yeah, as always, want to give a shout out to the chat. Chad, Jason Real, who's in our Dynasty Junkies 3 league. I believe we're playing him this week.
We are.
Ryan, everybody in the chat. Also got to give a shout out to Easton Stick, who's now put up 250 and 2 for my playoff team in garbage time. So I got to thank him for that.
Close to scoring again. So
okay, let's see touchdown number 3, Easton. And also, obviously, I want to also thank Dustin for coming on. It's been a great show tonight. Loved having him here.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. So I will end by saying Junkies out.